Get out, the words hung in the stale, overheated air of my parents' dining room, sharper than the carving knife resting beside the turkey. My father, Jesse, stood at the head of the table, his face a mottled red that matched the cheap paper napkins. He was pointing a trembling finger at the front door, his other hand gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. Get out, you mooching dreamer. We don't need fake artists embarrassing this family. My mother, Muggan, sat beside him, nodding in silent, grim agreement, her lips pressed into a thin line of disappointment she had been perfecting for 28 years. All of this rage, all of this vitriol over a can of store-bought cranberry sauce. I had arrived 15 minutes late to Thanksgiving dinner, still wearing my work clothes, carrying the offending can because I had been finalizing a deadline that wouldn't wait. To them, it wasn't just a condiment, it was proof. Proof that I was lazy. Proof that I didn't care. Proof that while my sister Endra was climbing the corporate ladder, I was just Brianna, the failure with the fake job doodling my life away while the adults did the real work. Before we continue, I have to ask, has your own family ever made you feel small just to make themselves feel big? Drop a yes in the comments if you know exactly what that silence feels like. I'm reading every single one because in that moment, stuck at my father's shaking finger, I realized something profound. They didn't want the cranberry sauce. They wanted the conflict. They needed me to be the failure so they could feel like a success, and I was done playing the role. My sister Indra let out a short, sharp laugh, the sound ricocheting off the beige walls. She swirled her wine glass, a cheap Muller I had brought for Christmas 2 years ago, and smirked. Finally, she muttered just loud enough for me to hear, maybe now she'll go get a real job instead of embarrassing us with her little doodles. My mother didn't correct her, she just crossed her arms, looking at the floor as if my presence was a stain on the carpet she couldn't quite scrub out. In a movie, this is the part where I would have screamed. I would have listed my accolades, pulled up my bank balance, or thrown the cranberry sauce against the wall. Or maybe I would have cried, buggered them to see me, pleaded for the love I had been starving for since I was 12. But I didn't do any of that. I felt a strange, cold stillness settle over me like the surface of a frozen lake. I looked at my father, veins still bulging in his neck, and then at my mother who had chosen her husband's rage over her daughter's dignity yet again. And I realized why I wasn't crying. I wasn't reacting because I wasn't losing anything today. I had lost these parents years ago. I had grieved them in the silence of my childhood bedroom, mourning the people I needed them to be versus the people they actually were. The invisible chain of obligation, that heavy rusting iron link that child to their family, no matter how much it hurts, didn't snap in that moment. It had simply disintegrated. It had rusted away flake by flake over 1,000 missed birthdays, snide comments and dismissive glances. Today wasn't a break, it was a release. The final link had turned to dust and I was free. I stood up, the chair legs scraping softly against the hardwood. I tucked my purse under my arm. I didn't look at Indra. I didn't look at the turkey cooling on the table. I looked my father in the eye, saw the expectation of a fight in his gaze, and I denied him the satisfaction. Okay, I said, just that one word, soft, final and absolute. The silence that followed was louder than his screaming. They were braced for a tantrum, for drama, for something they could use to paint me as the villain later. Instead, I turned my back and walked out. I opened the front door, stepped into the biting November chill and closed it gently behind me. I didn't slam it. Slamming doors implies you care enough to make noise. I walked down the driveway past the neighbors' pristine lawns and got into my 4-year-old sedan. I drove for 20 minutes, my hands steady on the wheel, but I didn't head toward the cramped studio apartment they thought I lived in. I drove past the city limits, past the commercial district, until I reached the private airfield on the outskirts of the county. The security gate opened automatically as I approached, recognizing my plates. I parked next to a sleek black SUV and walked toward the hangar where the chartered Gulfstream was waiting, engines already humming a low, powerful note. The pilot, a man who knew me only as the quiet woman who tuppered well and traveled alone, was waiting at the steps. Ready for departure to Scottsdale, Miss Brianna? He asked. Yes, I said, not looking back at the city lights flickering in the distance. I'm ready to go home. As the jet lifted off, leaving the suburbs and the cranberry sauce and the small, angry lives of my family far below, I didn't feel sad. I felt like I could finally breathe. The air in Scottsdale was different, dry, clean, and vast. It felt like breathing in possibilities instead of suffocation. My driver took the winding private road up the mountain, the city lights below, reducing to a shimmering grid of insignificance. When the heavy steel gates of my estate rolled open, revealing the sharp modern angles of glass and concrete against the desert night, I felt my shoulders finally drop. This was my fortress, my sanctuary, the place where Brianna, the failure, didn't exist, and Brianna, the architect of the digital world, reigned supreme. I walked into the foyer, the heels of my boots clicking on the polished concrete floors. I didn't turn on the main lights, I liked the shadows. I walked straight to my office, a room with 30-foot ceilings and a wall of monitors that hummed with the quiet energy of my empire. I sat down in my leather chair, the one that cost more than my parents' entire dining set, and woke up my primary screen. A single notification was waiting for me in the center of the display. Transfer complete, $15,200,000. I stared at the number, the commas, the zeros. This was the deal that had made me late for dinner. This was the doodling my sister had mocked. I had just closed an exclusive licensing agreement with a major tech giant for my proprietary digital asset library. While my father was screaming at me for store-bought cranberry sauce, I had been sucking a fortune that could have bought his entire neighborhood 3 times over. The irony wasn't lost on me. It tasted metallic and cold. To them, I was a mooching dreamer, a financial liability they had to tolerate. They didn't know I was the invisible hand that had been keeping them afloat for years. I opened a separate encrypted folder on my drive labeled External Support. Inside were the receipts. 2 years ago, when my father's truck was about to be repossessed, I had paid off the remaining $12,000 anonymously through a shell company. When my mother complained about her credit card debt drowning them, I had wiped out $26,000 of balance transfers, disguising it as a bank error settlement. I had done it because I thought if they were less stressed, they might be kinder. I thought if I removed the financial pressure, they might finally have the emotional bandwidth to see me. I was wrong. They didn't become kinder, they became more entitled. They attributed their good fortune to luck, to prayer, to clerical errors, never once suspecting that the daughter they called a failure was the silent investor in their survival. I closed the folder. I looked back at the transfer notification. $15 million. I wasn't just successful, I was a titan in an industry they didn't even understand existed. I had built a kingdom from the silence they forced me into. And tonight, sitting in the quiet luxury of a home I built with my own mind and my own money, I realized the transaction was finally over. The invisible support payments were done. The silent investing was closed. They wanted me to be a moocher. Fine, I would stop paying their bills and we would see just how heavy their own lives actually were. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for their world to catch fire, while I sat by my pool watching the smoke rise from a safe distance. The silence I had instituted wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, a physical barrier they kept trying to batter down. At first, the messages were exactly what I expected, petty, biting, and dismissive. My mother texted the day after Thanksgiving. Hope you're proud of yourself for ruining dinner. Stop pouting and answer your phone. Andrea sent a gift of a toddler crying with the caption, "This is you, grow up." They thought this was just another episode, another time Brianna would crawl back, apologize for existing, and resume her role as the family punching bag. But I didn't reply. I didn't even mark them as read. By the second week, the tone shifted from mockery to confusion. The invisible safety net I had woven around them had vanished, and suddenly reality was hitting them hard. My father left a voicemail, his voice tight with irritation. "Brianna, the truck insurance payment didn't go through. Did you change cards? Call me." Then my mother, "The bank is saying the credit card is overdue. I told them it was a mistake, but you need to fix it." They still didn't get it. They thought the magic money fairy had just taken a sick day. Then came the crash. It started with a news alert on my tablet. Local investment firm exposed as massive Ponzi scheme. I recognized the name. Immediately, it was the firm holding my parents' entire retirement fund. The golden nest egg they bragged about constantly. The reason they felt superior to everyone else. They had poured everything into it, convinced they were financial geniuses. Now it was gone, vaporized. The panic was immediate and explosive. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. 16 missed calls in 2 hours. The voicemails were frantic, breathless. "Brianna, pick up. We've lost it all." They froze the accounts. My mother was sobbing and begging me to pick up because we don't know what to do. Then came the demand delivered by my father with the desperate entitlement of a drowning man trying to climb on top of the person he just tried to drown. "We need a loan," he texted. "Just to cover the mortgage and the legal fees until this gets sorted. We know you don't have much, but you have good credit. We need you to co-sign a bridge loan. Family helps family." I read the text twice, savoring the bitter irony. The daughter they called a moocher. The girl with the fake job was suddenly their only hope for salvation. They wanted me to leverage my credit. The credit they assumed was barely functional to save the house they had kicked me out of. I didn't reply, I didn't call. I simply placed my phone face down on my desk, turned back to my triple monitor setup, and continued reviewing the blueprints for my new server farm. I wasn't pouting. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply adhering to the new terms of our Relationship, I was a stranger. And strangers don't cosign loans for people who call them trash. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the proximity alarm on my gate triggered. I wasn't expecting deliveries and my staff knew better than to arrive unannounced. I swiped the notification onto my main monitor, and there in high 4K resolution was a dusty 4-year-old sedan idling at the base of my driveway. I recognized the car immediately. It was the same car I had paid off for them 2 years ago. My parents had driven 12 hours from the suburbs to the desert, fueled by panic and the audacity of people who believe they own you. I watched them get out. My father, Jesse, looked smaller against the backdrop of my 12T steel privacy gates. He was shielding his eyes from the sun, looking up at the security cameras with a mixture of confusion and rage. My mother, Megan, was packing, smoothing down her blouse as if she were about to speak to a manager. They expected a shack. They expected a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood where they could barge in, sit on a cheap sofa and lecture me until I signed the loan papers. Instead, they were standing outside a fortress that cost more than their entire Ponzi scheme investment portfolio combined. The intercom buzzed, a harsh grating sound in the quiet of my office. I didn't answer immediately. I just watched them. And as I watched my father kick the tire of his car and point angrily at my gate, I finally understood the architecture of their cruelty. It's a concept I call the delusion of power of the empty wallet. For years, their authority over me hadn't been based on their strength, their wisdom, or their success. It was based entirely on my proximity and my perceived smallness. Bullying requires the victim to be beneath you. It requires a vertical hierarchy. But looking at them now, 2 desperate people shouting at a gate they couldn't open, begging for money from a daughter they called a failure, the illusion evaporated. Their power was never real. It was rented. They had rented their superiority by keeping me in debt, by keeping me emotionally starved. And now that I was standing on top of a mountain they couldn't even climb, their currency was worthless. They weren't angry because they were broke. They were furious because they were no longer the tallest people in the room. I pressed the talk button. My voice filled the air outside, crisp and amplified, echoing off the canyon walls. State your business. My father jumped. He looked around wildly before zeroing in on the camera. Brianna, open this gate. We know you're in there. This is ridiculous. My mother chimed in, her voice shrill and distorted by the speaker. We drove all night. We need to talk to you face to face. You can't just hide in there. I'm not hiding, I said, my voice calm, detached, devoid of the tremor that used to be there whenever I spoke to them. I'm working and this property is private. We are your parents, Jesse screamed, slamming his hand against the call box. You owe us. We need help and you're going to give it to us. I don't owe you anything, I replied. You told me to leave. You pointed to the door, you called me a moocher, so I left. I stopped mooching. And now you're trespassing. I didn't wait for their response. I cut the feed. I watched on the silent monitor as my father kicked the gate one last time, screaming words I couldn't hear at a building he couldn't enter. They stayed for another 10 minutes packing, calling my phone until the desert heat finally forced them back into their car. They reversed down the driveway, defeated by the very success they claimed didn't exist. Thursday morning arrived with the frantic energy of a dying animal cornered in a trap. My parents were back in the suburbs 12 hours away, but their desperation vibrated through my phone like a shock wave. The foreclosure deadline was at noon. They believed the bank was coming for the keys. They believed they were victims of a cruel, faceless system that didn't care about their golden years. They didn't. No, the system had a face and it looked exactly like the daughter they had discarded. At Tun Zara Zara the barrage began. My father sent a text, all caps, abandoning dignity for pure panic. They are taking the house today. We have nowhere to go. You have to help. Then my mother leaving a voicemail that sounded like she was hyperventilating. Brianna, please, we're sorry, we're so sorry, just cuss on the bridge loan. Don't let them throw us on the street. They were terrified of the bank. They should have been terrified of me. I sat in my office, the morning sun, illuminating the dust motes dancing over my desk. I didn't call them back. Instead, I opened a secure file on my laptop labeled Asset Acquisition Bundle 404. I scrolled past the legal ease until I found the deed to 42 Maple Drive, my childhood home. I hadn't just watched their financial collapse. I had bought it 6 months ago when their Ponzi scheme imploded. Their mortgage had been bundled into a distressed sale of toxic assets. My holding company bought the entire portfolio for pennies on the dollar. For 6 months, I had been the one telling the property managers to hold off on eviction. I had been the invisible wall standing between them and homelessness, paying the property taxes, extending the grace period, waiting to see if they would ever treat me with basic human decency without knowing I held their leash. Then came Thanksgiving. The cranberry sauce, the screaming, The moment my father pointed to the door when I walked out that night, I didn't just leave a dinner party. I sent an email to my legal team, processed the paperwork. I picked up my phone, I didn't type a long explanation. I didn't ask for an apology, I simply attached a PDF document and hit send. It wasn't a loan agreement. It was a notice to vacate signed by the owner of the property, Brianna Vance, CEO BV Holdings. I watched the read receipt trigger on my father's phone. 1 minute passed, then 2. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating as the realization hit them. The bank wasn't foreclosing. The bank had sold them to me. I wasn't the daughter they could bully into submission. I was the landlord they had just evicted from their lives, and now I was returning the favor. My phone rang. It was my father. I answered, putting it on speaker, my voice calm and steady. Brianna. His voice was a whisper stripped of all its bluster. You own the house. I do, I said. I bought the debt 6 months ago to protect you. I was going to let you stay there indefinitely. I was going to let you live rent-free in a house I paid for while you pretended I was a failure. Then let us stay, he begged, the sound of weeping audible in the background. We're family. No, I replied, the word tasting like cold iron. You made it very clear at Thanksgiving that I am not family. I am a moocher, a dreamer, an embarrassment. Well, this embarrassment is selling the property. You have 30 days to vacate. The movers are prepaid. Consider that my final gift. I hung up before he could answer. And for the first time in my life, the silence on the other end didn't hurt. It felt like justice. The final blow didn't come from me. It came from a printing press in New York. 2 weeks after the eviction, notice the issue of Forbes hit the stands. The cover didn't feature a loud tech bro or a celebrity. It featured me standing in my desert sanctuary looking away from the camera. The headline was bold black ink, The Invisible Architect. How Brianna Vance built a $500 million empire. In silence, I didn't send a copy to my parents. I didn't have to. The world did it for me. Former neighbors, old co-workers, distant cousins, everyone who had heard my parents call me a failure saw it. The humiliation was absolute because it was public. They couldn't spin it. They couldn't claim they always knew because the article quoted me directly. I succeeded because I stopped trying to please people who were committed to misunderstanding me. They moved out on day 29. There was no screaming this time. No demands for loans, just the quiet shuffling of boxes into a rented moving truck. They downsized to a 2-bedroom apartment 3 towns over. It's clean, it's safe, and it's small. Exactly the kind of life they used to mock me for having. They are safe, but they are no longer significant. And for people like Jesse and Megan, irrelevance is a fate worse than bankruptcy. I sat in my studio that evening, the article framed on the wall not out of vanity, but as a reminder. The sun was setting over the canyon, painting the walls in shades of violet and gold. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was musical. It was the sound of a life that belonged entirely to me. And in that quiet, I thought about the girl who used to buy store-brand cranberry sauce and pray for approval. I know there are people listening to this right now who are still in that dining room. You're still holding the cranberry sauce, waiting for a thank you that is never going to come. You're wondering if you're the crazy one, if you're too sensitive, if you should just try harder. I'm writing this letter to you. Leaving isn't failure, it's graduation. You have been taught that family is a burning building you have to stay inside of to prove you're loyal, but you don't. You can walk out. You can build a house they can't enter. You can build a life so bright that their shadows can't touch you. It will be lonely at first, yes, but loneliness is better than abuse. And eventually the loneliness turns into peace. Turned back to my screens, I had a new project to design, a new world to build. My parents were in their apartment living with the consequences of their choices. I was in my sanctuary living with the rewards of mine. The cranberry sauce incident was the worst night of my life, but looking back, I'm grateful for it. They thought they were kicking me out of the family. They didn't realize they were setting me free. If you enjoyed the story, hit like and subscribe for more story like this. Share this story. You are not alone. God bless you. Thanks for watching.